So we are now about to begin the first of our 2 leadership sessions. And this panel is going to be on the topic of activating men and boys, or HeForShe. Men are key to the progress in advancing women in the workforce. So how do we get more men to the table? It's actually phenomenal. When I look out here, there are quite a few men in the room. And thank you, thank you, thank you, because that's how change is going to happen when we both, men and women, work together. Thank you. So with that, I'm going to introduce our panelists. First, I'd like to have Rick Perot come up to the stage. He began his career as a digital marketer, leading award-winning marketing teams whose work helped turn clients into billion-dollar powerhouses. In 2009, Rick and 5 co-founders launched Unbounce, just a small company some of you may have heard of, the world's first drag-and-drop landing page platform, which empowers marketers to build, publish, and test landing pages and other conversion tools without the help of a web developer. Thank you, Rick. Welcome. Danelle Lambakia has a solid foundation in project management and is passionate about the use of technology. She holds a master's in computing from Manchester Metropolitan University, and she now manages the Impact 10 by 10 by 10 initiative at HeForShe, a solidarity campaign for the advancement of women initiated by UN Women, where she works with heads of state, global CEOs, and university presidents to advance gender equality. Welcome, Danelle. Next, Philip Grosch is a partner at PwC Canada and the founding sponsor and joint architect of the company's innovative leadership program, targeted at top talent and women, called Women in Leadership. His reputation as a sponsor and champion has led him to being named as PwC Canada's HeForShe role model, one of 4 within PwC's global network. He is also a member of the advisory board for WXN's Canada's 100 Most Powerful Women, as well as a board member of W North, a boutique conference for top and aspiring women business leaders. As some of you know, takes place in Whistler each year and is phenomenal. But please welcome Philip. Thank you. And today's moderator, Alice Labarge, from the Royal Bank of Canada, where she is currently a corporate director. Alice has served in a number of capacities with various local professional and charitable organizations. She's currently a director of the BC Cancer Foundation and has been honored with the Peak Award for Lifetime Achievement from the Association of Women in Finance, as well as the Influential Women in Business Award. Please welcome our panelists and moderators to the stage. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jill, and thank you all for joining us today. I think we've got a really great panel, and it's a really important topic that we're going to be discussing today. Just give you a quick idea of what we're planning to do. We'll have a 30-minute panel discussion, and then we'll be moving to table discussions, and after that we'll have an opportunity for some of you to talk about what you discussed at your table for the whole group to share. So I'm looking forward to that as well. First of all, just a few statistics, and I think most of you are very familiar with these sorts of statistics, but I'll just give a couple of them. So a study by Grant Thornton reveals that globally women hold an average of just 21% of senior management roles and only 9% of CEO jobs globally. More specifically, women account for just 17% of board members, 15% of C-suite executives, and 5% of CEOs at Fortune 500 companies. And finally, a 2015 McKinsey report, Diversity Matters, concludes that companies in the top quartile for gender diversity are 15% more likely to have financial returns above their respective industry medians. All very important statistics and as I said, many things that you already know. But as I mentioned before, we have this great panel who are all very passionate about this topic. Both Rick and Phil are senior people in the private sector and lead organizations who employ or can have significant impact on this conversation. And Danelle, as you've heard, is with UN Women and manages the Impact 10 by 10 initiative, an initiative that directly relates to this topic. So just to start off with the whole group, we'll ask the same question for everyone and we can just pass it around. Why do you do this? Why is this important? And if I can start down there with you, Rick?
Well, there's practical, ethical, moral responsibilities I feel I have, but I have 2 boys. And I want them to grow up in a better world where this is a problem of our generation, and they're growing up in a world where equality and diversity is just the norm. I think that's really what's motivating me today.
Danelle, same thing? You have a different perspective, obviously.
Yeah, so for me, and I think for a lot of people, it just makes sense. It's just the right thing to do. And I think gender equality sometimes has the perception of being a luxury problem. It's maybe something to look at afterwards, but in fact, it's the root cause of many issues. And gender equalities and inequalities affect both men and women. And so it's important to engage both sides if we want to achieve true gender equality. So for me, it's a very inclusive approach, and that's the only approach it has to take for this to be successful.
And so my journey was probably a little bit different in that, I'm pretty goal-oriented, and to be honest, I never actually sat down and said, I'm going to become sort of the champion for gender equality. But what actually happened was and probably started about 10 years ago, one of my mandates was to help us build our consulting business. And we did all these amazing things around it, attracting talent, and my lens was always it's talent. It's not male or female, and if you attract talent that represents the fabric of Canada, you get diversity, and we did a very good job at that. But then I started to see a very worrying trend where we were losing top talent women at a much higher rate. And so from a business perspective, that didn't make any sense. So one, we know that diverse teams outperform, and it takes a lot of time, effort, and energy to attract talent. And then when you lose them, you sort of one step forward, two steps back. And so that was really the genesis of it. And then it's been a journey where it's had the opportunity to get a much deeper appreciation. And I would say two things. One is, this is an enormous opportunity, and if you focus on it, you can actually make significant progress, but do not underestimate how difficult it is.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And as you just mentioned at the very end, best intentions don't cut it. You have to really be taking some action. So all three of you have been very active in this area, and perhaps I can go right back to you, Phil, and ask you, what specifically have you been doing, either personally or organizationally, to make a difference and to actually activate men within your firm?
Yeah, so what we have done, which has really worked out incredibly well, is we saw the problem, and we created a very specific program, which is our Women in Leadership program, and it's targeted at mid-career top talent women, because that's when you lose them. And looking at the stats earlier, I think that's across all organizations. And we recognize that having initiatives that are come in and talk to people wasn't actually working. So we built this 6-month immersive program that is really around providing insight in terms of how do these super smart young women build their career and life plan, and then give them the tools and the capabilities around, how do you actually be an authentic leader, and how do you stand up for yourself? And then we also surround them with sort of a network of champions. And that program has been wildly successful. So by January of 2018, we would have 200 graduates. And the last 3 years, we've had graduates of that program who have become partners at PwC. So that's why my message is, if you're serious about it, you actually have to double down and do something that is really impactful. And our use case is at 100% works, because we now have, a lot of women who say, if it wasn't for this program, I would not have stayed at PwC. So from a business perspective, it's a bit of a no-brainer.
Yeah, well, that's for sure. Rick, what about you're in a totally different area,
Different
and
space,
probably have different
and I think for us, I think we were mobilized by our employees. It really came, I think the sparks came from the bottom up. I think young people today choose to work at companies that share their values, and they want a space where they can talk. And they came to it, really the discussion started with young people in our company. And then as leaders, our job was, okay, well, how do we give them the space? How do we make it okay to have this conversation, and how to self-organize? And then that kind of evolved into us, or myself even, going, wait a minute, why aren't we doing this? Why aren't we doing this? And then just over time, evolving, asking questions. For example, we do a conference every year, And as many of you know, most conference speakers are predominantly male. There's very few women. There's a lot less women speakers in technology. And so I said, why don't we make an effort to find 50-50? And the whole company mobilized behind that. It was people were really proud that we did that. So when they see examples of that coming from leadership, and a combination of that and a safe space where they can talk about this, the ideas just start to flourish. And we followed up our conference with a boot camp for young women to spend a weekend with experienced speakers, so it could give them a little bit of training, a little bit of confidence, so they could actually apply to speak at the next, at a conference. So, and these are ideas that are coming from the ground up, and it's, and I feel like my job and the rest of our leadership team really feels our job is to support that, coach that, nurture that, learn from it, and then institutionalize the things that are really working. So I have a feeling we'll be doing more boot camps on a regular basis, for example. Yeah. But again, this didn't come from the top. This came from the bottom, and we're trying to do our best to support these kind of ideas.
That's great. Danelle, again, it's a different perspective that you're bringing in. So what specifically, maybe you could talk about what UN Women is and what the 10 by 10 by 10 initiative is. Yeah.
So as many of you may know already, UN Women is the global entity for gender equality and the empowerment of women. And the HeForShe initiative is a part of that. Many of you probably also remember Emma Watson's speech at the UN in 2014, which was the launch of the HeForShe movement at the time. It was a call to action for men to be engaged in the conversation of gender equality, and it went completely viral. It's not something that we anticipated at all. And we had men in every country in the world commit to becoming HeForShe within the first week. Within the first 2 days, we had 100,000 men commit to becoming HeForShe. We had members of parliament commit. So it was really growing as a movement, but we wanted to change that awareness into action. So people were talking about it, which was great, but we actually wanted people to do something about it. And so 6 months later, the Impact 10 by 10 by 10 initiative was launched in January 2015. And those three groups of 10 are 10 heads of state, 10 global CEOs, and 10 university presidents. And so this is really our top-down approach. And so we've deliberately chosen male leaders because the reality of our situation at the moment is that men do hold the majority of the power. And so it was important to engage with them. And each of them have made 3 commitments about what they'll do to advance gender equality. So to give you a couple of examples, we have Iceland, who is one of our head of state impact champions. They've made a commitment to achieve equal pay by 2022. So in 2022, we're all going to move to Iceland because we'll have equal pay. But PwC as well, a commitment to dramatically increase female leadership. And so PwC has gone from 17% female representation at their global leadership team to 47% in 12 months. And so you can only imagine you can only imagine how that filters down into the rest of the organization in terms of the decision making, the culture that then creates for the rest of the organization. And so that's really our top-down approach. Again, as you mentioned, this bottom-up approach is equally important. And we've had around 250 HeForShe student clubs be created since the launch of the movement. And this is not something that we have prescribed. This is supporters, advocates all over the world who have found a way, a meaningful way for them to engage in the movement. And again, a couple of examples. We had a man in Zimbabwe who created a husband school. So he literally took the men from the village who were beating up their wives, took them under a tree and taught them how to be better husbands. And this is not something, this is not my idea, this is not from UN Women, this is his idea. He's taking it, his initiative, something that will be meaningful and impactful at that local level, and implemented it and really started to see change. So ultimately, we want to work with global leaders, decision makers, to create change at a policy level, at corporate level, but also with the education system as well, because as we've seen today, youth is really the future for tomorrow.
That's fantastic. Wow, that's quite the initiative. And are you putting specific measures in place for each of these objectives?
Yes. So in total, there's 90 commitments. So each of these impact champions, as they're known, have made 3 commitments. So there's 90 in total. Our time frame is until 2020, with a few going over to 2022. So we really are on an accelerated timeline to deliver on these commitments. Each year we publish a report, which you can find on the HeForShe website, and the corporates and the universities all publish data around the representation of women within their organizations and their institutions. So year on year, we're able to see, are you progressing with the number of faculty? Are you progressing at leadership level? What does the graduate intake look like? And we know generally the case is that at graduate entry level, that it's more or less 50-50, but as you go up within organizations, it tends to halve when you're in single digits by that point. And so it's really important to hold them accountable as well in that way to be able to demonstrate progress against these. So yeah, KPIs, indicators, what gets measured gets done, so it's very important.
Right, right. Well, some of these initiatives that you've already talked about, sometimes they're easy to do, but sometimes you hit a lot of resistance. Have you had that experience, Rick? And if you have, how have you dealt with resistance within your own organization, possibly from other men in the organization or people that have maybe, if I can call, old-fashioned perspectives?
I'd say actually for the most part I haven't, not too much resistance internally, but when asked in the community, and again from those of us of my generation, Rick, well, as a business leader, why is this important to you? And I think as it's been said, it's like, companies that are more diverse, more profitable, they're better places to work, they're happier environments, they're more innovative. To me, as a business leader, I thought, well, I want that. Like that's, and that's where, you know, again, stats where you look at companies that are more diverse. This is where young people want to work. That's where the talent wants to go. That's where they want to stay. Companies that support families. So for me, that's how I answer that question. I definitely don't get the resistance internally. If anything, internally, we're probably not moving fast enough.
Really?
So I'm always, I'm listening to feedback. Actually, just something we're doing recently, I was listening, talk, and I just remembered, actually, we've got some applicants that are pretty hard to fill, and they're traditionally where we have one woman applicant for maybe 10 men. And we're going to interview, we're committed to interviewing 50-50, and we won't make a decision until we've done that. And that's just a simple thing we can do. And it's going to take some work. It's going to take a little extra effort, but I believe the outcome will be worthwhile.
Yeah. What about you, Phil? Have you had resistance within your own organization, or?
Yeah, so, first of all, I think the HeForShe movement is a great catalyst and anyone can use it. So, and we've certainly done that as a rallying cry. But, as we've gone down this path, I look at it as links in a chain. So we have sort of cracked the code of one link. The code that is much harder is this one of unconscious bias. So, and it's real. And I think, initially, because inside PwC, we pride ourselves on a culture of inclusivity and sort of teamwork. But, as we've done this, unconscious bias is this very misunderstood but huge hurdle to overcome. And I would say for 90% of it, it is unconscious. And when you get into it, unless you're actually going to be willing to stand up and call people out on it, not in an aggressive way, but to educate them. And it's, so I think that to me is the biggest challenge, because we talk about it, current course and speed, it's going to be 200 years. Mm-hmm. And it's like, in Canada, it's like, how is that possible? I mean, if we were in South America or Eastern Europe, you could sort of get your mind around it. But I think unconscious bias is the next big sort of hurdle, and without question, it is probably the primary reason why top talent women throw up their hands, and I'm not going to use the Deloitte phrase, but they pretty much do that and sort of leave. So that sort of has been our experience, and because of what I've done and this community that we've created, I probably get access to honest feedback from a lot of people that I normally wouldn't have got, and I think it's a little bit of a moment to actually stand back and say, if we all don't start recognizing that and dealing with it in a productive sort of educational manner, we can do all of these great initiatives, but while we still live in a world where 75% of leaders are men, I think we're going to have a tough time to make real progress.
Yeah. One of the things I've found in some of the organizations I'm involved with is that we had a situation where there were a lot of women at senior levels, the most senior levels, maybe not the CEO position, but definitely C-suite. And then in the last few years, I've seen kind of a regression where we might have had 4 or 5 women in these organizations. Now we're down to 1 or 2. I don't know, do you have any, this is a surprise question I'm putting on the panel, so do you have any views as to what's happening there? Because I scratch my head and I can't figure it out, and I've talked to our HR people many times. They've not been able to pinpoint why that might be the case, but maybe it's natural, I don't know. What do you have a view on, any of you, on that?
That's not been my experience,
It
though.
hasn't, yeah.
One of the things I do hear, and that could be related, is family. The responsibilities of family. As you move up in your career, you're also at a point in your life where you're starting to have a family and question. And it's hard. Just in the last 2 years, I've had 2 children myself, and it changes the way you work. And I know that's been part of the discussion, but I don't. I've actually seen the opposite happen. We went from 0 women on our senior leadership team in 2014 to about 1/3 of our senior leadership team today being women. And that's been, but we're a much younger stage than your organization, so something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, and in a different industry, maybe some of the more traditional industries made movement, and now there's just kind of a settling in process. I'm not exactly sure.
So I have a perspective on it. And I think it's where these programs are run out of. So if the program is initiated, run, and sponsored out of HR or D&I think it's very difficult to maintain the momentum. The role of HI and D&I is to provide enablement and data and tools and techniques. If you don't have business leaders at all levels actually taking responsibility and driving it, they lose momentum. And I think that's why those examples that you're giving, that's why it happens. So until we get to the point that it becomes something that is viewed as, this is a business imperative that leaders need to be held accountable for. And by the way, select leaders who actually are passionate and committed to doing it, because all the stats show that when you get this right, it's great for business.
Yeah.
And I think there's a discussion around how do you make that happen, and I know Pamela is here on the next panel. I mean, I think what she drove with the 30% of women on boards, I think that's had huge impact. So if we started to do that and say, hold public corporations and government entities accountable for actually showcasing what they are doing. And then I also think that large organizations and government should start using their purchasing power to say they will not work with or buy products or services from organizations who do not have real programs of diversity and inclusion.
Yeah.
I think just to add to that as well, you raise a very good point in that with the Impact 10 by 10 by 10 initiative, we've deliberately selected male leaders. This is a personal commitment that they have made. If they leave the organization, they're no longer an Impact champion, so the commitment is with them themselves. They have put their neck on the lines. This is dedication and passion that comes from them at a very personal level. And we also, from a HeForShe perspective, with these Impact champions, this issue comes up a lot as well in terms of reticence and hesitance around male engagement. And one of the things that we've seen work successfully is really addressing it at a cultural level first before you even try to do any initiatives, because you're really trying to create a new normal and a feeling of equality before you even embed any initiatives. And so an example of this is Accor Hotels, which is one of the largest hotel companies in the world. They are also one of our Impact champions, and they have a commitment to achieve equal pay as well. But before they've even looked at implementing anything around equal pay, they've put all their efforts into changing the culture at Accor hotels to create a new normal around equal pay so that when it comes, it's accepted and there's no challenges around that. So that to me was super interesting that they took that approach to create something that you know, was going to be really beneficial and to take it in that way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we could probably spend hours on this topic because there is so much that your organizations have done, and I'm sure many of the organizations out there. We have a very limited amount of time, unfortunately, but and we do want to have an opportunity for you in the audience to talk about some of these issues at your own tables. But before we go to the table conversations, maybe I could just ask each of you what's the call to action that you want to leave the participants with, or any specific thing that they could do going back to their own organizations? And I'll just start right here with you, Phil.
Okay, yeah, and it's an interesting question. I think first of all, you know, you actually have to do something yourself. So, you know, start, and whether it's small or larger. But the other thing that we have done, recognizing that the way to change this is coming from the top with the right messages, but also engaging everyone. So we actually took the HeForShe sort of momentum, and we started this grassroots HeForShe group. And it was, we picked 50 impactful partners. There was a combination of either they self-selected, or I went to our Women in Leadership alumni community and asked them to give me names of role models. And then we brought them together, and they've all committed to doing three things. One is to understand the data around where we are with hiring, promotions, and challenge it at every level through the career cycle. The second one is to sponsor a top talent woman, and we're not telling them who they should sponsor. It's just find someone that you believe in. And then the third one is to stand up and educate people when they see unconscious bias. And, you know, with that, I think at some point there'll be a tipping point where you have more and more people who firmly believe in it and driving it forward. You know, and that I think is probably a pragmatic way that you can get started.
Yeah, great ideas. Danelle?
So go to HeForShe.org and make the commitment to HeForShe. Is the very first tangible step that you can take. By doing this, you are adding your voice to the gender equality movement and encourage everybody you know to do the same thing, especially men. Just as a side note as well, we've deliberately called it a commitment rather than a pledge. So it's slightly provocative in that stereotypically men are afraid of commitment. So we have deliberately called it a commitment. I'm probably not supposed to say that, but it's okay. So make the commitment to HeForShe as well. So that's one thing you can do from me.
Thanks.
I'll tell you a quick story on how it started for us. I mean, how many of you walk into a room, look at a group of people working and say, hey guys? And the conversation one day said, well, that's not really inclusive. And then I realized also the unconscious bias. And a lot of us at the men realize that. And it's actually almost becoming a game now where, okay, I got to come up with this new word. And it's become a conversation. And when I walk into a room and I say, hey guys, and then I shouldn't, you know, I'm conscious of that today. So something, that little thing started a spark and started the conversation in our company. And from there, it's, you know, there's a lot of people who realize with this conversation that we're really passionate about this topic. So creating, for us as leaders, creating a safe space where they can have this conversation, whether it be time off to self-organize, whether it be the use of, you know, we have a Slack channel where this conversation and articles are shared, and then making the time as leaders to actually just ask and listen to the ideas, and then just question everything that you do. And so a simple thing would be when you're in tech, gender diversity is a big topic. You know, we don't have a lot of women applying for tech roles. And for us, okay, let's make an effort to go out and make sure we interview everyone we can, make sure we can create an environment where women who are in tech actually feel safe. This is a safe environment, so we don't call it Beer Friday. We have it Social Friday, and we make it inclusive, and we have, it isn't just gender, but, you know, inclusiveness overall. And we we're doing things. We're looking at programs where we can support mothers and working families in general. How can we support families? So these are all the little things that we can just look at that actually start to make a difference. And when your organization sees that as leaders, this is really important to us, I mean, there's no shortage of ideas on what we can do. It's just, so the ideas start coming up from the bottom and just get the conversation going. I think that'd be the first thing to do. And start with a little game about come up with a new word instead of calling everybody guys. It works.
Never thought of that. I never thought of that. I use that term a lot myself. So, but I just want to thank the panelists today. I have great ideas from all of you, and obviously some incredible initiatives within your own organizations. We're going to have the panelists actually go down into the audience, so whether you sit at a table or wander around a bit. And then we have a question that we're asking everyone to discuss at their table, which is how do we activate men and boys? So fairly straightforward. And we have about 10 minutes or so to talk about it, and then an opportunity for some of the tables to share with the rest of the group what came out of your discussions. But thank you so much today, guys. Today, did I just say you guys? Oh my God! Thanks so much for joining us today, and keep up the good work. So,
thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sure that you have a lot that you could still talk about at your tables. Unfortunately, we're running a very tight schedule here, and there's another really interesting panel coming up at 11:15. So we'll just have a few minutes to actually share some of the discussions you've had at your tables. I was reminded that you've been asked to input your responses into Slido, which I'm not that familiar with, so you've plumbed the depths of my knowledge on that topic. But so if whoever is more adept at this at your table, please make sure you do input it in there. So first of all, maybe I could just is there anybody out there that wants to particularly share what the discussion has been at your table? We have some roving mics, so you'll be able to speak to the whole room. If not, maybe I could start down over here. I think Rick was sitting at a table down here, and maybe you could share what was discussed at your table.
Actually, I'm going to discuss one thing quickly, and then I'm going to pass the mic on. But actually, something that was discussed here and that I've seen firsthand is that creating a space where you can actually, where it's safe to actually call out, not in an aggressive way, but actually say, hey, actually, that's not very inclusive. And like the guy comment I made earlier, guys. But actually, we every day we do have an unconscious bias, and we do things not with ill intent, but we do things that might not be very inclusive. And so creating an environment where it's okay to say, hey, actually, that wasn't really inclusive, and that gets us into practice, and over time, that's the kind of thing I've seen actually just allows us to have an honest, open conversation about this, and we all start reflecting and try to self-improve. But there was a lot more talk at the table. I'm going to pass on the mic here.
Go ahead, Tricia.
Okay, thank you. So the other thing we talked about was to start the men and the boys young. And we talked about actually women sharing the stories with the young boys and the young men, as well as raising an awareness to the community at large. And the third thing we talked about was having a cultural shift, working with companies and having them be the leaders. And one other important one that really came up that I think is very great is Sandy mentioned taking the women that are in power and partnering them up with the young men and the young women and mentoring them. Most of the time we see women mentoring women, but we never think of having women mentoring men. So.
One more. Okay, hi, I'm Janet Austin. I'm the CEO of the YWCA Metro Vancouver. I want to thank Lois and Jill for a really outstanding morning. I've been deputized by my table to talk to you about the whole issue of unpaid care. So when we talk about gender equality in society, it's certainly my personal belief that we'll never really achieve women's equality until we deal with the imbalance in unpaid care. So overwhelmingly, even though more men are taking part in domestic responsibilities, overwhelmingly, women continue to carry the burden for childcare, elder care, and domestic responsibility, and that's a huge impediment for them to be able to participate fully according to their interests, their education, and their aspirations in the economy and in society. So I think, when we talk about these issues, there are many wonderful things that organizations, corporations can do. We certainly do them at the YWCA, but this is really a systemic cultural issue. So I think we need to look at what we can do to shift culture around that sharing of care responsibility. So one example would be a number of jurisdictions internationally and also in Quebec have what they call daddy leave, which means for parental care, a certain portion of months is reserved exclusively for men, and they either take it or they lose it. In Quebec, we see that it's taken by 86% of the men who are eligible for it. And what that actually does is it normalizes the caregiving role in the workplace, and it actually reduces some of the gender bias in hiring decisions as a result. So I think these are the kinds of systemic reforms. A lot of people consider this to be fairly radical, but I think we need to discuss these things because really it's an issue that I think cannot be dealt with at the individual corporate level. We need to really look at it systemically. I'm also at our table is one of our wonderful vice presidents from Van City, and Van City has looked at this issue in the past where they've surveyed young men about their interest in playing a stronger role in the care of their families. And what they find is that young men would like to play a stronger role, but they fear the stigmatization. Mm-hmm. So this is actually, we're actually looking at the YWCA of undertaking a project which would be about this issue of unpaid care, where we would be looking to survey, find corporate partners who want to pursue and understand this issue better, survey corporate environments to find out what the current level of knowledge and awareness and thinking is, and then look at how we might be able to shift that culture. So anyone who wants to help, I'm your woman. Thank you.
We have time for one more question or comment. Just looking around. There's some back there. Yeah, right there.
Had to fight the soccer star for this.
Hey, my name's Jordan Bauer, and I run a business called Transformational Storytelling, so you can guess where this is going to go. I want to talk as a white heterosexual male. When I think about my own awareness around this issue, the things that have affected me the most are stories. And so in particular, seeing the Me Too movement a couple weeks ago was something that really got me here. Not just here, but here. And so what I want to encourage all of you out there who've experienced something like that, whether it's at the extreme version of that, or even the small transgressions that happen in your workplace every day, tell us about it. And tell us your story. You don't need to give us all the excruciating details, but give us something so we can really relate to it and feel it, because when we feel it, we're much more likely to change. So thank you.
And thank you for that. And thank you, everyone. Just one last reminder to input your responses into Slido. And again, thank you very much. Going on to the next panel and hopefully have another great panel just as we just had. So thank you again.
Thanks, Alice. Thanks.